Asia, and previously was the coordinator of the Freshwater Action Network South Asia, FANSA. And she was very instrumental in coordinating the study at the South Asia level. And we'll hear from her the more general background of the study, including challenges, gaps, and the recommendations that we drew from the study. Once we've heard, that will be about 10 minutes. Once we've heard from Sneha, we'll hear from one of the focal points based in Burkina Faso, Celestine. She will tell us a little bit more about herself when she introduces herself. But they have a very interesting case study, really to talk about what they've done since the study. The study was completed in May last year. And so there's already been some activities happening and follow-up actions to the study. We'll then invite interventions, particularly from our focal points at national level, those other focal points who are involved in the national study, who have ideas about follow-up or have already started some follow-up. And then we'll open it to a more broader discussion, sharing other ideas, which I will moderate. And this is also an opportunity for you to share your ideas and questions in the chat box. Please keep an eye on the chat box. It will be moderated by Al Hassan and Kiana from the End Water Poverty. So if you have any concerns or burning questions, please put them in the chat box there so we can make sure that we're hearing from you. And that way it's easier to keep your mics muted so that everybody can hear the presentation. So without further ado, I'll hand over now to Sneha. Sneha, I hope you're still there. The PowerPoint presentation you should be able to see that on your screen. So please follow the PowerPoint presentation. And just finally to say, if you are on Twitter, you can also tweet anything at all, questions or anything you found of interest in the session, hashtag account for SDG 6. And if you want to check that hashtag, Kiana has written that in the chat box. Okay, so over to you, Sneha. If you can kick off, and we'll give you 8 to 10 minutes to really talk us through the findings and recommendations of this global review. Thank you. Sneha. Okay, we can't hear you, Sneha, but I know you're there. Can you unmute your mic, Sneha, and so we can hear from you? Okay. Have we lost you, Sneha? Okay, just give me one moment while we try and reconnect Sneha here. Okay, Sneha, we can't hear you, so can you please unmute your mic? Hello? Okay, we seem to have lost Sneha here. Yeah, I've just sent her a message, so hopefully she will join in 1 minute. Sorry, bear with me, everybody. Sneha, is that you joining? This is the challenges of technology. Okay. Okay, I think while we're waiting for Sneha, I could maybe get started because we don't want to lose any time, and I know we have a lot of yeah. And maybe I could ask Al Hassan and Kiana, could you try and contact Sneha and see if we can get her on the line? but I'm quite familiar with the study, so if it's okay with others, I'll do my best to convey.
Sneha is back. Hey, Sneha, can you hear us?
Yes, Al Hassan, I can.
Oh, you're back. I was just about to do the presentation on your behalf, Sneha. Very happy to see you back there. So I've made the introduction, so if you could just get started and share with all the participants the findings and recommendations of the study.
Okay.
Over to you. Thank you.
So let me know when to change the slide, Sneha.
Okay, Al Hassan, I'll keep telling you the next one. Okay. My name is Dr. Sneha Lata, and I work as an executive director of Saki Waters, which is a policy research organization working in South Asia region on integrated water resource studies. And then as part of my engagement with this global review of national accountability mechanism, when I was in FANSA as a regional coordinator, I did collaborate with all the 8 countries, and then we did this, and I was also part of building the conceptual design of the project, and then implemented this assessment in all the 8 countries and compiled the report. And that with that experience, on the behalf of all the partners of this particular assessment, I am presenting the study findings for you today. Next one, Alison. Next slide, please.
Okay.
Right. In this context of the previous one, in this study context, what we meant the accountability is the people who are responsible for service delivery deliver those actions, and then they accept the responsibility if they have not taken up these activities, or if there are any omissions. And the service providers also give an account of why and how they have acted or failed, and then adjust their policies and actions accordingly. So, so keeping this definition in view, the entire study was designed and conceptualized. And this particular, next slide, please. This study was undertaken in more than 25 countries across the 4 continents. In South Asia, there are 8 countries, and in Africa, and then in 5 countries, and then in the Europe also we did in the Netherlands and other countries. So basically, what accountability mechanisms are, like, you know, what exactly we mean the accountability means. The accountability mechanisms should be formal. That means which has a legal basis, which are regular, and then they are transparent enough in providing the information. And these accountability mechanisms should be inclusive. That means they should be able to focus on engaging diverse group of stakeholders. That means all the marginalized groups and all the disadvantaged groups should be part of this inclusive approach. And the accountability mechanism should also be able to facilitate and encourage the critical reflection. It should not be just a reporting format, and then you just go ahead with it and then not have a reflection or a feedback. Then that's not a good accountability mechanism. And it should be responsive to the issues addressed by the stakeholders. And an accountability mechanism should also accommodate the forward-looking process. That means it should seek to influence the government actions in future and making them more responsive to the needs of the citizens whenever those kind of gaps or needs are found while building these accountability mechanisms. Next slide, please. Next one. So basically, when you look at, in reality, in most of the countries, these are not available, and then even if they are available, they are not actually reliable to depend upon. And some of the accountability mechanisms reported by the governments are the joint sector reviews, which are globally undertaken, and then the sector events and the working groups responsible for monitoring SDG 6. And then there are also seen some of the participation of different stakeholders as part of data gathering. So government engaged the NGOs, CSOs, or other groups, research organizations in terms of data gathering. And sometimes they also consult and then the validation role is they are the conferences and events for advocacy, coordination, and sharing of learnings and best practices. And sometimes in some of the countries, they also undertake the shadow reporting and auditing exercises. So these are the various mechanisms that were observed while conducting this study. Next slide, please. So when you look at the top accountability mechanisms that are mentioned in each of these regions, you can see that in the government monitoring mechanisms in Asia, they're about 34%, and then in Central America, 52%, and in Europe, 39%. And the government events and national meetings are like little less percentage in terms of 28% in East Africa and 24% in West Africa. And then there are independent committees which are mostly found in Asia and Africa. And the joint sector reviews are not so common in any other continent except in West Africa. And only in Europe you find the democratic systems, but in the rest of the countries you do not see, in the rest of the continent you do not see this. Next slide, please. So when we look at the participation of CSOs in these accountability platforms, we saw that there are 33% of people who do not attend. And then about 33% of the people said they participate regularly. But there is a point in this, those who participate are the NGOs, which are larger NGOs, which are found in the national capitals and then operate from there, but not the grassroots NGOs or the NGOs which work at the state and the district and sub-district levels. And some of them said that they do participate occasionally, that's about 24%, and 9% said they do not know. However, the findings do reveal that despite those who participate, they are also not very clear with what exactly to contribute in these platforms. Next slide, please. So when you look at the monitoring and reporting, reporting on the SDG 6 as such, most of the countries are still in the process of initial stages of developing a systematic process. In fact, in majority of the countries, it is still like the SDG 6 monitoring indicators are not aligned with the national policy or the national level indicators. And then the global monitoring instruments like JMP and such things are often used for tracking progress towards the SDG 6 at national level. And some countries are still developing and mapping the SDGs. There are some baseline indicators and targets are in the process of development in some of the countries as reported in the study. Next slide, please. Previous one. So, yeah, after this. So when you look at the challenges in next one, please, Al Hassan. Al Hassan, next slide. The next one you're going to previous. Yeah. So when you see the challenges in accountability, most of these mechanisms are not good enough to hold the governments accountable when the things are not going in the right direction. And most of these lack a legal basis for existing accountability mechanisms. And then there is irregularity and limited follow-up of outcomes. And the format of the meeting itself limits effective participation. And then there is a lack of diversity of stakeholders represented, and there is insufficient financing or budget allocations for building the accountability mechanisms. And the most important thing is there's lack of interest or the political commitment to undertake these accountability mechanisms. That's one of the inherent problem of why most of these countries are still lacking the progress on accountability mechanisms. Next one, please. And then when you look at the participation challenges, it is again lack of awareness, knowledge, and capacity of those who are participating in these meetings. And then there is lack of coordination and confusion about the roles and responsibilities and mandates for each of these organizations when they represent. And then there is a lot of failure to be transparent. The processes are not transparent enough, which allows the participation. And finally, there are very limited platforms and resources to represent the grassroots voices. Since the resources are not allocated for accountability purposes, a lot of these grassroots NGOs are often not invited for these meetings because of budget constraints. Next one, please. So the challenges in monitoring when you take it, data is incomplete and not aligned with the SDG 6. And also lack of real-time update of data. Most of these are at least 2 or 3 years behind when you see what is happening on the final data, which is available online. The actual date of conducting that data is somewhere 3 years back. So that kind of a real-time update is not available, and there are inadequate and not disaggregated enough to track the services received by marginalized groups. So unless there is a shadow reporting, you really do not know what's happening to the monitoring marginalized groups, because they just track for all the groups as it is. There's no special focus on how the services are given to the marginalized groups. Next one, please. However, the successful accountability experience does show that when they are taken up in a more responsible way, then they are successfully influencing the government policies and priorities. There are certain cases like Togo and other countries in Africa which have proved this. And there is an increased focus on grassroots and marginalized groups. When the reports come out with these things, then governments do commit in terms of focusing their efforts in including the marginalized groups. And then there are increased partnership between stakeholders when these platforms are promoted. And there is an improved coordination of actions and more clarity on roles and responsibilities among the stakeholders. So these are some of the positive experiences when there are some good accountability systems operated at the country level. Next one, please. And as part of the, again, positive experiences, there is a political attention with tuning for SDG 6 and capacity building of government, and there are more funds allocated. And there is improved access to information and transparency on government actions. And there is increased information and awareness creation among civil society, and learning and sharing of good practices among the implementers of the SDG 6. And there is an improved monitoring and reporting practices of SDG 6. So these are some of the positive experiences observed from various countries. Next one, please. Next one, please. When we come to the recommendations, there are for various sets of people, the recommendations are there. For the government, sorry, I think the slide, the wrong presentation is here. The recommendations include, on the government side, they should be more transparent, and the budget allocations for accountability mechanisms should be given. And then there have to be systematic efforts in terms of including all the different stakeholders at these accountability platforms. That's for the government side. And for the NGOs, the recommendation is build their capacities and make sure that they know what role they have to play when they are participating in these accountability platforms. And they should also know the ways and means of making the governments accountable, and making sure that they deliver the services. And then by engaging hand in hand at various levels, the NGOs can achieve this process. And the organizations like UN and then other funding organizations at a higher level should promote, and then the platforms like HLPF spending more time on reviewing the SDG 6 and making sure the countries report regularly on the SDG 6. And also the countries, the organizations should make sure that there is an intentional effort to build the accountability mechanisms at the country level, which encompasses the national, state, district and sub-district levels. There are more, but because of the time constraints, I'm closing it here. Thank you, everyone.
Okay, thank you very much, Sneha.
Back to you all.
Thank you. I think that was very clear. Just to let all the participants know, you can read the full report on various websites. It's on the WSSCC website, and it's also on the End Water Poverty website and other websites. And I would just like to ask Kiana, I think at the end she will share the link to the full report and the executive summary. It's available in English and French. And for those recommendations, just to be clear, we have a set of recommendations for governments, a set of recommendations for civil society organizations, a set of recommendations for development partners, and also recommendations for UN agencies. So when we're thinking about follow-up, we're also looking at, we're not just talking about how to hold governments account, but also what should civil society do, development partners and the UN. And when we're thinking about follow action, we're also looking at ways to follow up on all those different recommendations. Thanks very much indeed, Sneha. You will see that Kiana has shared the link in the chat box to the full report. So please do, after this call, please do look at that. Please read it. Please send us your emails and comments and let us know how and in what ways you feel that you can engage, because as I said at the beginning, we really see this as a milestone in ongoing work around strengthening accountability mechanisms. And clearly, as Sneha has outlined, there's an incredible amount to be done before we can really see effective and meaningful mechanisms at the national level around SDG 6. What we wanted to do next was speak to a couple of our focal points who led the study at national level. You may have questions for Sneha. What I would like to ask is that you write your questions in the chat. Sneha can read the chat also, and then once we've heard from a couple of the national focal points, then we would also hear back from Sneha. I see in the chat box someone's asking for case studies. That's exactly where we're going now. We were hoping to have the national focal point for Burkina Faso, Celestine from Water Aid Burkina, joining, but I understand he may be unwell. So I'm just going to ask Al Hassan, who's the coordinator of End Water Poverty, to share just a couple of minutes, please, Al Hassan, the case study from Burkina, what's happened in Burkina, and also what are they doing in terms of follow-up. Before that, just to draw your attention to the global report, if you read the global report, you will find a case study for every single 25 countries. So if you're interested in specifics around a specific country, that is in the long report. There's a 2-page summary with recommendations at national level in the long report as well. So Al Hassan, can I pass over to you to just for a couple of minutes to talk about the Burkina Faso case study, please?
I hope you can all hear me. Sorry, I have a bit of dry throat here. So basically, we were supposed to be joined by...
Can everybody hear Al Hassan? Can you hear him?
Can you? Okay,
yes.
Great.
Yes, Tanzania, we can hear you.
Oh, brilliant. Okay, so what I'm going to do, basically, we were supposed to be joined by Rukaya too from SPONG, the national coordinator for SPONG, but unfortunately she's not feeling well as of this morning. We're trying to get Celestine for Water Aid to step in. Celestine might step in a minute, but he's also tied up in some things. Pre-planned travels and other things. But what I'm going to say is this: in Burkina, they did an excellent job in terms of taking the study to the next step, what they did was to convene a national dialogue around the work that we did. So Burkina was one of the focal countries, and they invited various ministries who were involved, from water ministries and NGOs and stuff, and had a kind of brainstorming to look at how they can use the report to deliver SDG 6 in country. And this initiative from Burkina came out of no nudging from the global committee. And for me, this is the most important aspect of our work. This work is supposed to be led by national level and owned at the national level. And what we're seeing from Burkina is an excellent initiative. If we get Celestine probably in the next presentation during the French session. So after this session, we're going to have a French session at 11 a.m. By that time, we might have someone from Burkina to share more highlight on what's happened, the outcome of the meeting. So I would, at this point, pass it to Wilhelmina to tell us what's happening in Tanzania post the research. Thank you, Karen.
Okay, thank you, Al Hassan, and sorry to everybody that due to unforeseen circumstances we weren't able to connect our Burkina colleagues. However, I do know that Wilhelmina Malima, who is the national coordinator for WSSCC in Tanzania, she was the focal point, the lead for the study at Tanzania level. She's also the chair of TAWASNet, which is a civil society network of CSOs working on WASH there in Tanzania. She's joining us from Tanzania with some other sector stakeholders, including some representatives from the ministry there. And we know that they've really started engaging in some serious follow-up. So Wilhelmina, could you just share with us, take a few moments to tell us a little more about the findings in Tanzania, some of the key recommendations, and how you're following up now in Tanzania on this study? Can you, hello, we can hear you. Hi, welcome, Wilhelmina.
Thank you very much. Yes, I'm here. We are about 6 people sitting here with some young professionals to learn on how things are happening. Yeah, so in Tanzania, actually, I mean, our challenges are not different from what has been presented. We have the CSOs, we have the government. Most of the mechanisms that we found out for accountability were the same, like the joint water sector review. And one thing to note from the presenter, she noted that joint water sector review are only in West Africa. They are also in East Africa. So that has to be noted because it's one of the mechanisms that we use in Tanzania, I think in Kenya and Uganda. So as part of a follow-up, of course, after this study, we had the midterm review of the Water Sector Development Program, the midterm review, which also accommodated the review of the dialogue mechanism, which was identified by us as part of the accountability mechanism. Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, Wilhelmina, we can.
Yeah, all right. So these same challenges also came out, and recently we had a roundtable, almost high-level meeting involving sector members and development partners, including CSO, where WSCC was represented by Rebecca as the assistant NC and Darius from TAWASNet. So these issues came out again in terms of the weaknesses of the CSOs, and I will invite Rebecca also to share some updates from that. But for us, this was an opportunity also to see how do we set ourselves for monitoring, for accountability. So for us, I assume this is the platform now. It's like we are replanning, because we have had also some weaknesses and gaps in terms of regular holding of these forums to make sure that things are reported. And the big problem or big gap was the resources to make those forums happen, because things are changing in terms of the sector support. Most of the partners have gone into earmarked projects, so you find that the coordination has been weakened a little bit because of lack of the resources to that one. But I would invite Rebecca, she's here. She can also share some of the agreed actions, although we are waiting for the report from that meeting, which we can happily share, and it will be as a tool for us also to kind of strategize the better. Yeah.
Okay, that would be wonderful. Thank you very much, Rebecca. And absolutely, we understand some of these actions are ongoing, but I think it's very useful to hear what you're planning, and also as you're going, what challenges are you facing as you're trying to follow up on some of these actions. So yes, over to you. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
At the meeting of presented by the government as well as presented by the development.
Please just speak a bit closer to the mic, Rebecca, so we can hear you. Thank you.
Just a moment, she's setting up her mic, but she can speak from my computer. Okay.
I was present at the meeting of representatives from the government and representatives from the development partners who are supporting the water and sanitation sector. And there are a number of actions that were agreed and will be followed up to improve the accountability mechanism, especially the sector dialogue mechanism, and especially the funding for supporting the dialogue mechanism so that stakeholders meet regularly and hold one another accountable. One of the actions was that every partner, and the government and the development partners, will be allocating funding. It will be a cost-sharing exercise to support the dialogue mechanism. The issue of CSOs was also raised, and it was seen that there is a gap in how CSOs are engaging in the sector. And one of the reasons was that the CSOs in Tanzania, especially the national ones, are relatively new in the development agenda, and their capacity is still developing. And there was no solution to that. It seems that the CSOs need to ensure that their capacity is developed by coming up with innovative ways to develop the member organizations of the CSOs. But the other issue that came up was that irrespective of the funding modalities, the dialogue mechanism needs to be sustained and to focus more on the sector strategic issues and not only on the program management issues. That was another issue that was brought, and to ensure that research and academia are also being made part of the sector. So some of the actions that were agreed are like that.
Okay, thank you very much, Rebecca. And I mean, you talked about challenges in terms of the capacity of civil society to engage in some of these dialogue mechanisms. Are there any other challenges that you're facing? And also, can you talk a little bit about next steps? And as we start to plan for the next round, if you like, the voluntary national reviews next year, what type of work are you engaging in with government and other stakeholders to start to prepare for reporting on the voluntary national review?
we know that the Minister of Finance and Planning is responsible for coordinating the voluntary reporting for Tanzania, and they have engaged with representatives from the sector ministries to develop that report. The gap there is that the representatives for each sector are not relating very effectively back in their sector ministries, and that needs to be addressed. In terms of webinars, we are not yet very organized, but there were some gaps in the dialogue mechanism, as Wilhelmina said, and now that is being rectified to make sure that stakeholders are meeting and are sharing and reflecting together and arriving at decisions and actions. So we have opportunities in the sector dialogue mechanism itself, and also we have the global dialogue mechanisms like the Sanitation and Water for All, and also the glass monitoring for targets 6.A and 6.2, which we are planning and we have started to strengthen so that we can improve on the accountability processes and on the monitoring. There are many other challenges, but I think those will be handled as the stakeholder dialogue mechanism is improved.
Okay, and did you find that, that the study itself then was a good mechanism, a good process in order to really ignite this dialogue and to strengthen the dialogue mechanisms with the government and other sector stakeholders?
Yes, it was actually very good. It was a good system, a good effort to assess what is not being systematically assessed in our regular mechanisms. One issue that we have repeatedly discussed is that the accountability mechanism might not be only for holding the government accountable, but also for holding other stakeholders accountable, the development partners and the civil society organizations, including the international civil society organizations and the national civil society organizations.
Yeah, and I think that's a really important point that you made, and why I would encourage everyone, particularly those people joining from countries, to look at to revisit the recommendations that were specific from country level. And as Eloise has written in the chat and reminding us, there's recommendations at the country level, which you include holding civil society to account, not just governments, and also the other development partners. And really sitting and looking at those recommendations to figure out the best possible dialogue mechanism at that national level to really strengthen the accountability mechanism. So thank you very much. I think it's really encouraging to hear from about the ongoing work from Tanzania. We understand there's challenges, but I think it's very encouraging to see already what the impact of this report has been in Tanzania. We have also some examples of follow-up work in Kenya, and I wanted to invite Patrick Mwanzia from Simavi just to say a few words, if you're still with us, Patrick, around what's happened since the study in Kenya. Thanks again to all our colleagues in Tanzania. I do hope, as I said earlier, this isn't part of an ongoing conversation, and we'll continue to find mechanisms so that you can share and learn across country as we follow up on this study. So over to you, Patrick, if you're still there.
Thanks.
Patrick, you may need to unmute your mic. We can't hear you.
Yes, you can hear me now? It's clear now?
Hi.
Yes.
We can't hear you, or at least I can't hear you.
I've already unmuted my microphone.
I hear you now. Sorry. Please go ahead, Patrick. Welcome.
Yes, I'm Patrick Mwanzia from Simavi in Kenya. and we participated in this study also. And one of the recommendations of our in-country study was an appeal to CSO, civil society organization, to identify existing structured engagement spaces provided by the national and the county governments and avail themselves to participate effectively in the accountability processes. And when you look at the entire study, both in Kenya and also globally, it was very clear that most of the CSOs were not effectively engaging in the spaces that are available on accountability mechanism within the country. For example, you have seen from statistics that 3% of them do not participate. 9%, they don't even know whether those mechanisms exist. And around 24%, they just do it on and off. So almost over 60% of the CSOs were not effectively engaging in these processes. So one of the follow-up steps that we did in Kenya through the Watershed program was to get the whole report for Kenya, and then we developed a briefing paper on national accountability mechanism for SDG 6 in the Kenyan context. And this briefing paper, we published it, and we've been able to share it across the board with the different CSOs, just as an awareness to make them aware of what are existing mechanism spaces available for them to engage and to contribute to the accountability process of SDG number 6. We also had a very good opportunity to share this briefing paper during the 41st WEDEC International Conference, which was held here in Kenya. And as a Watershed program, together with the partners that we are working together with in the country, 5 CSOs and the consortium partners of the Watershed, that is IRC, SIMAVI, ACVO, Wetlands International, we were able to share this briefing paper of the study during the WEDEC conference with the international delegates, and also targeting the CSOs from Kenyan context. And from there, they were able to get a number of copies, and from that time, most of them, they were also coming back to me, asking me about these spaces where they can engage, when are they held. And so that was the first level of putting the CSOs aware of what exists internally to get involved. And finally, the same briefing paper, we were able to have one of our colleagues attending the high-level political forum in New York, where she also got an opportunity to share the same. This was from our partner Kwao during the meeting in July in New York. So that's so far what we've been able to do to make it aware, to spread the information to the CSOs, because they are supposed to be also participating actively at the higher level. And also as a smaller level, as a Watershed program, we're also trying to build the capacity of the citizens groups on the grassroots level, on the different social accountability mechanism that they can also use and raise their voice to the duty bearer, that is the government, for provision of water and sanitation services at their level. So those are the 2 prongs that we are using the study to take a follow-up steps after the study was done last year.
Okay, thanks very much, Patrick. And I think it's excellent from here to hear about all that work in Kenya. And also, interestingly, that one of the members of your network, Irene Gay, actually represented at New York at the high-level political forum. And I think that was very useful also to see not only the reporting on SDG 6, and I think as Sneha mentioned, also to understand the limitations of just 3 hours every 4 years on one SDG, but also the voluntary national reviews. And I think what we learned really from the voluntary national review process is that, that it's it has been very difficult to engage. It is voluntary. Not like the human rights framework. I see some conversation in the chat around that. And the feedback differs very, very greatly from one country to the next on what is actually reported back in the voluntary national review. And I think as we go forward at national level, linking the accountability mechanism for SDG 6 with the voluntary national review process is also quite important. And I think we have certainly some interesting case studies in Togo, which we may hear in the French webinar, around, for example, developing shadow reports to the VNR, the Voluntary National Review, which I think is also quite interesting follow-up action that can be done at national level to make sure that there's participatory input into the Voluntary National Review. Do we have anybody? I want to open this out now a little bit more broadly, particularly to national focal points. I haven't been able to moderate, to look at the chat as well, but I know that Al Hassan is doing so. Is there anybody else that would like to share any follow-up actions that they've been undertaking at national level following the study? Maybe if you could just write in the chat if you have something to share. If not, I'm going to ask, while you're doing that, ask Al Hassan just to summarize one or two questions back to Sneha, because I saw some coming through the chat. Are there any, could you summarize one or two of the key questions, Al Hassan, that have been posed to Sneha? And Sneha, hopefully you're still there. You can be on standby just to respond to some of the questions that have been coming through the chat.
Thanks, Karen. I would say also there are a couple of people on this call who were involved in the study,
yes.
not just only Sneha, who can also give some extra information on some of the questions. One of the questions I found very interesting is from Moratori. Have I pronounced your name correct? Is on the whole issue of CSOs using national human rights mechanisms, from the National Human Rights Commission to engaging in the UPRs, that's Universal Periodic Review, reports that countries every 5 years they present to the UN Human Rights Council. So I think for our study, although we did not specifically mentioned people should look out for issues on human rights, we were trying to understand it was an open question. So what we, apart from Kenya and Mexico, none of the countries raised how they use human rights mechanisms in country. And for us, post this study, one of the issues that we would like to follow on is to push the whole idea that we need to work more on human rights at national level. Sneha Kand, or Murali, who has been doing some work in India also on human rights, closely with the special rapporteur, would be able to tell us more on this.
Maybe I'll tell a little bit, and then Murali can give his views. I think some of the questions that I also was reading about the roles and responsibilities of CSOs and how to participate, as the study clearly comes out and very clearly points out that some of the roles and responsibilities are not clear to the CSOs. There is a dire need that their capacities need to be built. And then I also see the questions and the follow-up. Yes, it is very much required. We need to share the reports with the national government. We need to have kind of follow-up workshops on these things, and then try to work hand in hand with the government. Like, for example, the FANSA has taken lead, at least in 3 countries, in sharing these accountability findings at the national level. And then in India, they also went ahead and then shared at the state level using the other financial resources. And then there are state and national level task teams are formed for tracking SDGs. Similarly, in Bangladesh also, they have shared these findings at the national level. So I think some of those actions we need to captivate through the networks and then take it forward. yes, working with the human rights groups and taking that forward is also a very good option. But I'm not sure in all the countries there is the similar kind of a favorable atmosphere to take that route. So we need to kind of judge the atmosphere and then take the decisions accordingly. For example, in India, the CSOs were not called for the meetings. The reason that the government has said is that they always come and criticize. They don't really give a constructive criticism, and then the rights people will go and always tries to, pose that everything is a problem and nothing is going in the right direction. So it is kind of very discouraging for them to invite the CSOs just to get criticized. That was one of the version. And then while the CSOs also felt that they need to know how exactly to interact with the governments and then influence their policies and work hand in hand with them at various levels, also was felt by some of the CSOs on the other side. So some of those actions are at that front. Again, to take this forward, I think the financial resources are very, very essential, and we need to kind of lobby in from these higher funding organizations or the UN level organizations to start allocating some resources to strengthen these accountability mechanisms. In fact, this should be part of the project preparation itself. From the beginning itself, they should make sure that these accountability mechanisms are built in. Maybe I think Murli can take forward from there.
Okay, thank you, Sneha, for excellent presentation, and also friends from other parts of the world who have shared the experiences from their national level engagement. I think for want of time, I should be very brief, but I have just a couple of very quick comments. Number one, the study has basically brought out the kind of gaps that exist at the national level accountability mechanisms. And we have been sharing the findings of the study formally, informally with different key decision makers in the government. And the kind of feeler we get is, number one, there will continue to be gaps in terms of accountability mechanisms at the national level because the government lacks capacities and resources to be able to develop robust accountability mechanisms and also make them work very systematically. So they are also looking for kind of support from other non-governmental actors to develop these kind of really strong, robust accountability mechanisms. This is number one. Number two, the governments do not really care to pay attention to the kind of concerns raised or the gaps analyzed by the global assessment report on accountability mechanisms, because governments are not really very sensitive to the voices from outside the government. I think in such a kind of situation, the civil society organizations and other non-governmental actors should get together, aggregate their strength, and continue to put strong pressure on the national governments so that the doors are opened up for inclusion of the non-governmental actors and also have really strong functioning accountability mechanisms at the national level. And third point is, I think we should continue to, I think the global assessment report is a very successful effort in terms of bringing pressure from international circles on the national governments. I think the sharing of the report during the HLPF and subsequent dissemination is really helping that manner. I think we should continue to have those kind of initiatives which would generate pressure from the international circuits so that the national government start paying attention to these aspects and work at the national level in developing the accountability mechanisms. I think that's the kind of way forward, and this is really a great effort, the global assessment report. And for the civil society organizations also, it has really given a lot of insights how things are working at the national level. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Murali, for those comments, insightful as always. Before we go on to more questions, I just wanted to raise one particular comment in the chat, which I think is useful, from Eloise, the CSO advisor for SWA. And she did a very quick summary from her side, and I think it's useful just to share that some of the sort of follow-up steps that seem to be emerging are really the need in each country at country level to learn what are the current accountability mechanisms, look at the recommendations and try and figure out, what is effective and what isn't, and then how can we develop collectively advocacy strategies at country level, and what are the messages, and then target the key moments. And I think this is important to really think of. It's like, when are the key moments for influence that are part of the national planning and accountability mechanisms? We're not encouraging setting up new mechanisms. It's really understanding what are the mechanisms that are the planning mechanisms, accountability mechanisms that exist, and how to engage. And they may be, we've already mentioned some joint sector reviews, voluntary national reviews, the SWA platforms, and there's many others, and then really push for that mutual accountability and make sure that all actors are involved to strengthen the sector. So you'll find Eloise, the SWA CSO advisor, and she's very happy to engage and follow up with anyone who would like to sort of find out more about the SWA, but also advocacy advice on how we really follow up on this report. Al-Hassan, could you just also summarize from the questions in the chat, what else is coming through in the chat that we either to pose questions to Sneha or anybody else in this call, please? There's somebody, I think maybe we'll mute that. Al-Hassan. Is he speaking? Is he speaking? Hi, Al-Hassan. Could you, can we hear from you? Okay, we've lost Al-Hassan somehow. You're on mute, Al-Hassan.